Hi, my name is Mark Dance, and I'm going to, in this video, explain a little bit more about the staging and storage of the Columbia and Western. The layout was recently featured in Model Railroad Planning 2012, and I had a number of questions regarding how that worked, because Comback did a great job with the track plan, and it shows 3 of the 4 levels, but unfortunately we didn't have enough room to describe the staging and storage level, which is the lowermost level at 30 inches. So I wanted to do this video because many people had questions about exactly how things worked. So to the right of me here is the easternmost section, visible section of the layout at Troop Junction. Nelson Yard is the division point between the boundary sub and the Nelson sub. The Nelson sub runs east from Nelson through to Cranbrook, goes to Troop, and then it disappears into eastern staging, and I wanted to spend a bit of time describing exactly how that works. The original design of the Columbia and Western called for a staging yard on the lowest level, 30 inches above the floor, and below the 42-inch level of Castlegar and the Kraft pulp mill. I described the storage yard in one of my YouTube videos. I always like the idea of using indexing tables because they're so space efficient. So here, I'll just demonstrate again. That clicking U here is the detents that align both ends of the tracks to the feeder track that runs along the front of the storage table. There's 8 tracks, and they can hold 20 cars, 50-foot cars plus 4 4-axle units, so they hold quite large trains for my layout anyways. But we can see the problem of having a storage table like this is in an indexing table being used for staging, in that in the middle of an operating session, if you wanted to index a train and then run it out of staging, you have 2 problems. The first is that actually pulling the indexing table in and out is going to be inconvenient when this yard is full of operators. The Kraft switcher operator, there's many meets that are made at Castlegar, and then also up at Cascade, so that wasn't very practical. The second thing is, in order to actually access a staging yard underneath the lowermost level of the layout, you need to get the trains up. So I had to use helixes. There's a very large double turn helix in the western end. I think feeds the western end of the layout, and also feeds the eastern end by using the Y junction I already described. It feeds out to Troop Junction. And on the southern end, there's an inverted wedding cake helix that feeds the southern staging. So that whole idea, although the mechanics work quite well, wasn't going to be very practical in an operating session. So instead, what we ended up doing was we put a 2-track staging yard on the top of the inverted wedding cake helix at Tadnak. You may also notice that underneath that helix there's actually a return loop, so you can actually turn whole trains. I put a similar type of double track staging yard at the western end, at the end of Cascade, that sits on top of the large helix, and then midway through that continuous run helix there's actually a 3-track staging yard which can be accessed from Troop Junction through the Y, and that allows us to store 3, possibly 4 if we use the other leg of the Y, 4 trains for the eastbound areas of Cranbrook and Creston. Here we're demonstrating south staging, which represents Tadnak Trail. This is where the big smelter and fertilizer plant are. We see a passenger train has been staged in south staging 2, which is a relatively short track which only holds trains of approximately 15 cars. And we see a train making its way up from the storage yard. This would normally only be done between sessions. This is a long train from Cranbrook, which is going to be restaged into the Nelson yard. It's entering on the continuous run helix, but if it was to be staged prior to an operating session in south staging, it would occupy the main, which I call south staging 1. Here we see a train on the Nelson subdivision. This is extra 4104 east, which is the hotshot, leaving the Nelson yard and traveling through Troop Junction. This is the last part of the visible section of the layout, the easternmost section of the layout, and this train is going to head off to eastbound staging. So the main line leaves the visible portion, easternmost visible portion at Troop Junction as we saw, It actually travels underneath this area of shields on the boundary subdivision and branches. There's actually a Y underneath this area of shields. The continuous run that connects to the large helix, which is behind this backdrop, spirals up and then connects with Cascade, which is the westernmost end. It also Ys off and goes to a 3-track hidden staging, which represents Cranbrook and Creston. I can also use the Y in staging, so in fact we have capacity for 4 trains during an operating session. Here I've removed the cliff face, which sits right above the Digitrax system, and you can see the helix behind. I'll zoom in a little bit. We can see that there is one train staged. This is a westbound train. It's staged on one of 3 staging tracks that slope downwards from the junction, the Y junction, which is hidden behind the shield's cliff face. To the left of this image we see the indicator panel that I use to track the trains in the hidden trackage. The LEDs on the indicator panel are driven by infrared diodes, and when the diodes are blocked by the trains, the LEDs will come on. We'll soon see that eastbound train that we saw leaving True Junction pass through an indicator and a green light come on the bottom right hand corner. We'll now be able to track the progress of that train as it moves into east staging. The panel is made of steel, which is quite convenient because I can use magnets to indicate which trains and their Digitrax locomotives are in staging, so it's easy to dial up and dial down. The panel has proven pretty reliable, although because of the complex nature of the east staging, I tend to operate it as the superintendent. Here we see the eastbound train that we saw leaving Troop Junction as it is now entering east staging. It's actually on a Y track right now, and that Y track joins both east staging as well as the continuous run that goes from the storage yard all the way up to west staging or out to Troop Junction. The train now is moving into the helix. We can see there's another train on the far side. It will pass behind it. There are 3 tracks in staging here, so you can actually store 3 very long trains, and that's enough to keep the train, keep the railroad filled with eastbounds and receive westbounds when necessary. On the west end of the layout is Cascade. The main line disappears behind the backdrop at Cascade and into western staging. Western staging representing Grand Forks, Midway, and the short length of the Carmi sub that remained in 1970. To pilot your train into staging, you can use the mirrors. There are 2 mirrors, one on the very ceiling, and we can see the train progressing, as well as one that shows the top of the helix. We can see the train moving its way around the top of the helix now, and the westernmost switch at Cascade. It will now move into western staging, which is a 2-track staging. We have an OR extra, eastbound OR extra, that's staged on western staging track 2, and 8604 is going to move onto staging track 1, which it's doing now. We can use the indicator panel, which I demonstrated before, to also guide our train into staging here if we don't want to use the mirrors. And we can use the magnetic indicators so that we don't lose track of which locomotives and trains are where. There are 3 other short staging yards. One of them is a sneak-off track behind the potato warehouse at Cascade. This represents the Great Northern and Burlington Northern subdivision, which goes down to Republic. Here we can see a couple of F units sneaking out from behind the potato warehouse. This track is long enough for a couple of 4-axle units and 4 or 5 cars and a caboose. Second short staging is also a Burlington Northern staging. It exits the layout room at South Nelson, which is above the Nelson Yard. This train has made its way up from Troop Junction, having left the Nelson Yard about a half an hour earlier, and is making its way about 400 or 500 feet above Nelson proper. It will then exit the layout room and store itself in one of 2 staging yards that's in the accompanying crew lounge. The final staging is actually on the Nakusp branch. It's at Rosebery. Originally the Nakusp branch went all the way to Caslow, to the east of Rosebery. And I've simulated the dead-end staging in New Denver with a simple set of staging tracks that exits the main line between Rosebery and the cusp through the wall behind Rosebery. The New Denver staging is very hard to find. It's actually in the aisleway above Shields. It exits the third level through the hole behind Rosebery and is actually hidden from view by a smoked plexiglass panel. So hopefully that describes a little bit more clearly exactly how the storage and staging works on the Columbia and Western. Should you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email me at mark.dance@gmail.com or to reply back through YouTube's messaging system.